Doug Adams here to talk all things running with you. And this week, I want to start with a question. I want to first ask your opinion, what do you think? And I might have answered this differently before preparing for this week. If you were considering purely cardiovascular benefit and you're doing a workout, which do you think would be more beneficial? A 30-minute run of sustained cardiovascular at moderate intensity, or 3 10-minute intervals with a 5-minute break in between each? Which do you think would be more beneficial for cardiovascular health? And that brings us to our topic of cardiac drift. As a lot of you who've taken classes from me or have talked with me or worked with me in the past, I'm a big fan of heart rate training, but I'll be the first to admit it's not perfect. I think that there are things that we can improve upon, and you can't take it, although it's very objective, we have to consider that there are factors that influence what our heart rate is. So intensity-based training really helps to keep us honest, and it's a great all-encompassing way to really understand how your body is responding to the work that you're doing, but it's not perfect. And one of those things that I want to talk about is, because if we can educate ourselves and our athletes, then I think we can get more out of heart rate-based training, and that's cardiac drift. So cardiac drift, I have an example up here where we're seeing that this is one of my runs that I did a couple weeks ago, an hour-long run, and we see that the heart rate started off at a certain level, fairly level course, fairly level effort intensity the whole time, but the graph slopes up. So when I finished my run, even though it's about the same intensity, my heart rate was higher than it was in the beginning. And this is a phenomenon that we call cardiac drift. So I want to explain a little bit more what this is. This is one of those questions runners ask. This was one that I got asked this week, and I did a little research and diving into it because I want to make sure that I understood it as well. So I want to share some of that with you now. So I'm going to bring this so that you can see this full screen here. And with cardiac drift, it's what we just defined. It's a common increase of the heart rate despite real no increased effort level, and can even be up to 20% increase in heart rate over time. What we see is that this really starts at about the 10-minute mark. Once you get to about 10 minutes, we see that stroke volume, or the amount of blood that is being ejected by the left ventricle, starts to reduce at this 10-minute mark by up to 25% over the duration of the time. And what happens, and the reason that this is occurring, is because that blood is being sent to the periphery because our body temperature goes up as we're working out. So the heart has to keep the same cardiac output. So if the cardiac output is the same but the stroke volume is lower, our heart rate increases. So if you're training by zones of your heart rate and you want to keep it in zone 2, but you start going up over it, are you really staying in that zone, or maybe you underperforming for what you could be if we see this drift in your heart rate as you go? That's an important factor that we really need to consider. So we see that it's not always something that we can really change too much, but there is research to show that hydration accounts for 50% of the magnitude of the cardiac drift that occurs during continuous exercise. So if you're better hydrated, this study looked at cyclists, and one group was able to drink, the other was not able to drink, and they saw a 10% cardiac drift in the dehydrated group, the one that wasn't able to drink, and only a 5% in the group that was. So that controls about 50% of the amount of cardiac drift that we see. So I thought this was interesting because, all right, well, how are we going to use this? What are we going to really do? And that brings us back to our early question of which workout is better. So as we start to look at it here, we're going to start to understand that how do we mitigate some of this? Because what we've seen is that the time spent at maximum stroke volume is a key training variable to improve fitness, and is one of the biggest predictors. That stroke volume is one of the biggest predictors of fitness. So if we want to spend as much time there as we can, but we start seeing very early on in exercise a reduction in that stroke volume, then we need to start figuring out how we can really train our body and spend more time in that zone to get the maximum cardiac benefit. So this one study that we have here, what they did is they did two groups. One did a continuous 30 minutes, and the other did a 10-minute interval at the same intensity level, 60% of their VO2 max, and they did a 5-minute rest period between the 10-minute intervals. And what they found is that the time spent at maximum stroke volume was about 10 minutes in the group that did the intervals, but only a minute and a half for the continuous exercise group. That's really significant, a big difference between the two. And I think that there's not only benefit from cardiovascular, but you have to consider the lower physiological stress that we see on the body by incorporating these rest intervals in. So what I see with this, and the way that I think we could really use this information, is that one, if people are new to getting fitness, a walk-run interval is a great way to do it, especially someone that's looking to improve their cardiovascular fitness. If you're a healthy population or an unhealthy population looking to get healthy, that can be really helpful for you to do some of these intervals. It doesn't always have to be maybe the 5-minute interval, but interval training can help to increase the time that the heart is pumping out that maximum stroke volume that we want. The other thing is, when we're designing our workouts for even our higher end athletes, we could start to consider that the benefit of getting to that max stroke volume is really important. And when we're doing tempo work, or we're doing CV work, or near VO2 max kind of stuff, a shorter interval with more rest may get more benefit. I know a lot of people, especially recreational runners, there's not unlimited time to do some of these runs, but it shows that even shorter efforts done with more rest might be more beneficial. So if you don't have time for a 90-minute run, you might get as much or more benefit from going out and doing 4 10-minute intervals with 5 minutes in between, so that you're closer to an hour, and get even more benefit from going and doing that 90-minute run. And I'm not saying we should never do a long run, and there's lots of other benefits. There's ways that we improve fitness that aren't just purely cardiovascular. But if we're working on purely cardiovascular fitness, this is really something to incorporate in. I think this, as a running specialist working with runners, you should really understand what this cardiac drift is, so that you can educate your runners and that you can design your exercise programs around it. So please leave a comment for us. Let us know what you think. If you've heard of this, some great workouts that you have. As always, you can check out some of our courses and learn more about training and ways to mitigate some of these things. And we hope you enjoy it and have happy and healthy running.